than $3 million. Pretty much, we have been doing that for the last 2 years to really to researchers who are addressing these white space opportunities along the value chain and getting solutions to them. So if we have any people over here from universities, working with professors, please do, work with your professors and apply for our research grant program. You can go on our website, gfi.org/research grants and find more details on that.
Yeah, I think we shared this in phase one where everybody was basically requested to go and take a look at all the proposals that we've currently funded across the world so that people can understand them and take inspiration from them for their proposals. So those of you who have done that already have a better way of thinking of what are the most impactful ways of going on about thinking of innovation from a research and science and technology perspective in this area. So that's why all the resources we send are usually sent with a lot of thought behind it so that you could use it accordingly.
Perfect. Thank you, Shardul. And here I just wanted to point out a few projects that we have funded as a part of our research grant program. And you can also think about the kind of novel research that is happening, right? And think about how you can, think something similar for your proposals. Uh, so something like crop breeding and plant-based meat optimization, right? Dr. Dil Thavaraja from Clemson University is actually breeding organic pulses for like increased protein content, increased functionality, which I was just mentioning earlier. Then there is a company called Trophic in the US, which is actually trying to extract protein for seaweeds. So something really, not even plants. So technically, seaweeds and all are algae, and algae are not plants. But again, using new or underutilized crops. Dr. Benjamin from Israel is trying to look at quinoa and seeing how it can be used as a raw material for plant-based meat products. So really interesting research happening around the globe. Second is our own project happening. So the Good Food Institute, we are working with ICRISAT, which is in Hyderabad, and the Research Institute on Sweden to understand sorghum, pearl millet, and finger millet, and understanding how they can be used in different food products. So please stay tuned. We'll have results on that project sometime next year. The third one is again, how do you utilize the side streams that you're generating, to better your cost economics? Dr. Bruins from Wageningen University is doing that research. And also Dr. Sato from Brazil is trying to look at cassava leaf proteins and looking at how can and every component from cassava leaf can be used to, create a plant-based meat product. Then we also have, from a processing standpoint, a lot of projects that we have funded. We have funded Dr. Mario Martinez, who's, I believe, is no longer at University of Guelph. He's moved to Denmark, but then he's trying to, do research in whole muscle engineering through microstructure engineering and HME. So I think a question that was asked earlier. So he's really trying to look at microstructures too, in addition to macrostructures, so which is very interesting. Dr. Coxell from University of Manitoba is trying to do research understanding inline monitoring and manipulation during processing of plant-based meat. Because as I told you, there are so many things happening inside an extruder. So she's trying to develop methods through which you can understand the state of the protein in different parts of the extruder, which would be great, right? Then I know how to optimize my conditions accordingly. We also have other, projects going on around plant-based fats. So we have Professor San Martin from UC Berkeley, who's trying to incorporate different types of oils in plant-based meats and kind of looking at the organoleptic properties post that. And people are looking at fermentation as a technology. So traditionally, when you use grains, you have this beaniness sort of flavor, but people are trying to see if I ferment these proteins or these sources, does my beaniness go away? Is that something I need? So again, interesting research. And this is something I believe I went through in my first presentation too. These are the end product companies, again, Beyond and Impossible are out there. But then again, there is Corn too, which uses mycoprotein. Garden Gourmet is a brand of Nestle. So even the big companies are getting into this. It's not just about the end product. It's also about the ingredient companies, because without, functional ingredients, people really cannot make final plant-based meat products. So I think this really fits into the category 5, and that is the need of the hour. Like, I can tell you one thing that, entrepreneurs in India, when they want to make plant-based meat products, usually they have to import ingredients. There is a lack of, functional plant-based ingredients in India. So, and India has got such a great agricultural diversity. So if you are a participant working in category 5, I feel it's very important, and it's something that you could tie into your proposal. There are also companies like Flextral, Wenger, and I believe there's a webinar or something by Wenger coming up soon. So you can take a look at that webinar when they are kind of developing the extrusion technology to make better plant-based meat products. And this was a slide again, kind of showing how plant-based meat has really grown over the years. Again, from 2017 to 2019 to 2020, you could just look the number of stores in which plant-based meat is available. Same thing for retail too. It's not just about food service channels. It's also about retail channels. And essentially, there is still a very big opportunity that exists uh, in the market, and this is a great time to be making plant-based meat products or plant-based meat ingredients. So really, these were the key takeaways. We spoke about texturization technologies, how to make different types of plant-based meat products. We touched a little bit on nutrition, and then we spoke about what white space opportunities exist and how you can contribute. So thank you. That's all I had, and we can take more questions now.
Awesome. So we have few questions in the Q&A box, and people, please start submitting your question. We've kind of started at 7:30 and we had time till 9:30, but it really depends on the number of questions, how long we are going to stay on this webinar. So if you have any, questions that are not specifically pertaining to us spoon feeding you about your proposal, we welcome those most, and we'll be selecting those questions. Any general insights about the things that have been discussed today? Again, just to repeat myself from yesterday, any other specific or general questions you might ask that would help you think better about any of the ingredients or processes or technologies or the science behind it, those are preferred. Great. Having said that, and as you start submitting your questions and start upvoting relevant questions accordingly, we'll take it from the top. Um, yeah, so it's basically about processing and its effect on nutrients.
Okay.
More quantity of proteins and fibers of our plant-based product makes the consumers less prone to NCDs, despite the fact that it is ultra-processed. So you've read the question from Indra, right, Siddharth?
Yeah. So I think okay, nutrition is something, we can have a lecture on nutrition itself, right? A lot of times, there is nutrition from a theoretical standpoint, and then there is nutrition from a clinical trial standpoint. So this is a great question. In general, yeah, this is a great question. Mm, I actually don't know the answer to this.
Yeah, I
This
think
has to be answered more
it's
precisely, looking at academic papers.
yeah, it's a good question though, and something worth wondering. Um, can you talk about replacing gluten, especially from wheat, with different types of gums? What are some gums usually used in the industry, etc.?
Yeah, so gums have been used to replace gluten and get like a layer, thing sort of structure and even texture, right? You can use certain gums to bind ingredients together, giving that sort of chewy feel. There are different gums in the market. There is carrageenan, which can be used. There is xanthan. There is locust bean gum. Sometimes people use a combination of gums, and that gives a better sort of final product. Yeah, you can look at carrageenan. I know that carrageenan is one gum, which has been experimented a lot.
Again, some of them these are general questions, so I mean that's what you covered. So it would require reading up on those topics. I'm not going to cover those. Um, Again, like we've talked about this quite a few times, right? HME and its availability in India, and what other low-cost technologies can be looked at in similar way. And you told us a little bit about spinning in the last lecture. Uh, any other insights there to add, or would you recommend people to try and look into literature of similar processes and technique where shear and texturization is kind of imparted on the food products, and then trying to think of ways of coming up how that could be used?
Yeah. Uh, So again, there is a dearth of HME equipment in India, right? Having said that, uh, you know, you could try contacting universities. Sometimes, a lot of these companies, the basic equipment can be the same, both for low moisture extruders and high moisture extruders, and then it just is about how do you install the cooling die, etc. So that is one way, you can think about it in terms of low cost technologies. Again, as Shardul was saying, spinning is one technique which is relatively low cost, and it's still not a lot of research on it, right? So it is also a very good white space opportunity for researchers to work on and get a product out in the market.
Yeah, and there are no existing databases which are comprehensive. We've started building out a smart protein ecosystem project where we are trying to get in touch with a lot of companies, equipment manufacturers, ingredient manufacturers, and get them into, a database so that it could be easily shared with prospective researchers and entrepreneurs. But that is not available anywhere in India, unfortunately. In the US, you can go on Practo and many other websites and look up a lot of these vendors, and these are aggregated, but because the ecosystem is not mature enough, that data is missing, so it's difficult to share that. Having said that, the next question is basically talking about, uh, yeah, I think this was covered again, so I'll skip to the next question. When it comes to twin screw extrusion, which is usually used for snack foods like um, namkeens, etc. in India, does the cooling die attachment make it possible? Like, are there any ways to convert existing low moisture twin screw extruders, which are used for snacks, into high moisture extruders? Any insights on that aspect?
It's a very good question, right? And it's a very engineering question. uh, I mean, it seems possible kind of theoretically, right? Because even if you looked at that paper, essentially the process was same till the end. The screw configuration was the same. It's just that it exited into a cooling die. So that's a very good question. I mean, if you can talk to any equipment manufacturers, any engineers, and fit it in, yeah, so it is possible. Again, it has not been done, but that also means that it's a white space opportunity.
Got it. Thanks. Um, Yeah, and there are entrepreneurs in India currently also working on doing that, right? Trying to add their engineering skills, and not necessarily that they come from a food engineering background. They might be from a mechanical engineering background or chemical engineering background. Or sometimes people have also worked in factories where these machines are produced. So just getting somebody who understands manufacturing and engineering in and out, those people can certainly help you look at these questions in the long run if you're ever thinking of doing that. But it can definitely be done theoretically. We're just waiting for more people and more companies to actually take their production abilities and modify it so that they can look at adding cooling dies and make some modifications in the entire equipment so that it could possibly be used for better quality high moisture analogs. Awesome. Yeah, procuring ingredients from other companies, outsourcing that function, or making it in-house. Again, like I think this was discussed, a similar question was discussed on last webinar. But like TVP shreds in that case also, right? People can outsource it, get it from a vendor, and then remake it. Or what are the benefits of doing it in-house?
Again, I think this is similar to a question which was asked yesterday. If you're buying a TVP from say company XYZ, and then I'm also a manufacturer and I'm buying the same TVP, essentially like you don't have any IP benefit, right? But if you're making this TVP in-house, you have exclusive rights to this TVP that is being made. So that is definitely one thing. But then you have to like wait against the cost of making the product, right? Now you have to set up an entire new R&D unit to work on this. You have to set up manufacturing on this. So it just depends on, you know, what basically your product, the amount, the cost, the funding you have available, etc.
Awesome. Take a pick from the remaining questions. And if audience, anybody has more questions, please submit them in.
Okay, so this is a Karajinan. I'll take this question. So apart from a binder, can it also be considered for its protein content? So I think the question is around seaweed, and it's around, if we can extract carrageenan from it, which is already being done in India, right? Can we also use the protein in it? Excellent point. You can use the protein in it. In fact, yesterday, as I was mentioning, we are doing a really big strategic analysis of the entire value chain of seaweeds and microalgae, and we are trying to figure out that, hey, if you are a company which is extracting carrageenan from a particular seaweed, what are you really doing with the protein? Like, can that protein be used? Is the protein functional? So that's a very good idea right there.
Awesome. That was a good question indeed. Can you talk about the effects of heat on protein and starch? I know you kind of touched this. What kind of undesirable effects it might have, like the process of extrusion and heat that is applied and that specific phase.
Uh, yeah, so I mean, your protein is going to denature, sorry, your heat is going to denature your protein, right? And that's what you want in an extruder, actually. So if you looked at the nitrogen solubility index, you wanted something which dropped, right? That was an indicator of the texturization. But then you don't want too much denaturation too, because then you might just get a product which is very dense and hard. So it's just, understanding your final product characteristics and then changing your extrusion parameters accordingly.
Thanks for that. You mentioned during your lecture that not too many lipids or fats can be added in high moisture extrusion. So at what stage can we add fats to our product? I don't fully understand this question, but you get the gist of it.
Yeah. So fat can also be added later, right? I mean, you can make your product, but you can still sort of coat it later with, like fats and flavors, etc. So that can be one point how you could, if adding fats during extrusion process is not working out for you, you can think about it from that aspect.
Awesome, thanks. Um, Products will have incorporation of fats in them. Uh, can you throw in some light on how fats usually interact with other ingredients during what happens exactly inside the dyes? Things when things are getting extruded.
So I was talking about this, right? Too much of fat usually causes slippage. So your material doesn't really get sheared and be subjected to temperature that it needs to. Yeah, so essentially it doesn't get denatured enough. And you'd get a product that is not like texturized, but rather just sort of like a slimy sludge sort of a final product, which you don't want.
Awesome. I think yeah, the rest of the questions don't really make a lot of sense in the specific context of this webinar. You can take this first one, but it's kind of general. Anybody else, if you have a question, please submit it. Otherwise, we'll have to close down the webinar at 9. We still have about 8 minutes. Please submit your questions if you have. And I hope you utilize this opportunity for a Q&A with Siddharth.
Yeah, so again, as I was telling this earlier, right, jackfruit in its raw form has that fibrous texture. But once you're going to shred it and blend it in an extruder, again, I don't have the answer. I would believe that, it loses that texture. Uh, but again, you could try doing an experiment and see what happens. That would be the best way to answer it. Any insights on shelf life of high moisture extruded analogs? So again, you need to freeze it or refrigerate it or retort it to increase its shelf life, and that's how you're going to preserve it. From a microbial perspective, from a organoleptic perspective, again, you need to make sure how you're going to be packaging it. You need to keep tasting it. It could oxidize. It could start developing off flavors. But then again, that again depends on the extrusion parameters, what you use, the initial ingredients, what you use, etc. Will the color of quinoa hinder imitating chicken products? That's a good question, right? A lot of times, again, going back to algae, color is again something, you don't want a green color chicken, right? So that's something you need to take into consideration. And when you're using your raw materials, you don't want to use like some extremely green material or extremely orange material, which is going to change your final product color. How do we tackle degradation of colorants during post-processing? Again, a very good question, right? So sometimes you use more color, sometimes you use a color that is more resistant to heat and pH conditions. So this is where food processing really comes in, right? The questions what we are getting is never, I can't really have a theoretical answer for you, right? Because I can tell you, okay, use a certain color, right? But that color might work just for a certain temperature and pH condition. Now you are changing that, it might change. I give you a certain color, but again, that color is going to work with your soy protein isolate. But now you change it to fava bean protein, again, the base color is different and your color again changes. So that's where the innovation really lies. And again, food science is a science, but it is also a lot of like keeping on doing experiments and, just getting your final product to be the right texture and flavor.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about degradation of colors, especially in extrusion, in post-processing, or other forms of technologies where basically you're taking a product out of extrusion, you might have to post-process it a little or cook it a little. So, just in that process, your thoughts about how we can preserve the degradation of colorants.
Uh, okay, degradation of color. So again, colors are again heat sensitive. In fact, I could tell you one example. The way Beyond is thinking about colors is when they use beetroot juice and they actually use Maillard browning in the later stage when the consumer cooks it so that it's brown in color. So in one way, you can call it degradation of that red color, but it's giving brown color which the consumer wants, right? So color does degrade because of temperature and because of pH conditions. Most of the colors at least. So I, again, you need to look at the specifics of colors. There are a lot of good color companies I could refer. One is called GNT Colors, and they have like hundreds of SKUs of colors. And again, one color, good for certain heat condition, one color good for certain acidity conditions, and then just talking with them and getting the right color in.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about approaches when, especially this might be relevant? We were also discussing this when COVID hit India, and R&D centers were closed, universities were closed. Entrepreneurs were thinking of better ways of probably designing their experiments or doing rapid R&D. Are there any tools or any softwares that people can use to optimize their product process development? Because in extrusion you take a lot of feed, you run a lot of trials, and there is no replacement to actually getting your hands dirty and getting those experiments done. But can you optimize the design in some ways and just talk about any of those things?
Yeah. A good question. So, if we are talking about reducing the number of experiments, there is always a DOE, a design of experiments, which you can plan out, wherein, instead of doing 20 experiments, you can do 8 experiments and figure out, okay, how is changing a certain ingredient or a certain processing parameter, changing my final product. That's what you can do. Uh, Other than that, just having some knowledge on the ingredients that are going in, and determining how your final product is going to be, understanding uh, the extruder itself. And you can look at papers, right? I think, as I was mentioning, I think the professor at University of Manitoba, this is what she's actually trying to do. She's trying to figure out, are there any parameters that we can uh, point at every stage of extrusion process which we can use to determine, if my extrusion process is going correctly or no. So a lot of research is going on really to understand this aspect. So you can take a look at the answer is, you can take a look at the professor's research papers. You can also look at some inline monitoring, just type inline monitoring, food processing, keywords in Google Scholar.
Thank you, Siddharth. I think in the interest of lack of questions today, we can actually go ahead and schedule in half-hour slot with the participants closer to the registration deadline, because I'm sure people will have many more questions to think through in the last week. So we'll try to do that. And thank you so much, everyone who joined us today for this webinar. We're giving you your half hour back so you can go back and work on your proposals in this time. Thank you so much for joining us, Siddharth, and sharing your knowledge today. Appreciate your presence. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and all the best with the proposal.